Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Mike Ames Show. We have quite a lively show today because we've got a live debate around working from home and what's the ideal balance between working from home and being in the office. So it's going to be a good show today, right, Mike?
I think so, yes. Hi, Kirsty. Hello to everyone. I think this is an important debate because we're doing this now. It's not going away. It's here forever. I don't think we'll ever go back to the way it was before. When you hear about things like Barclays getting rid of big chunks of their real estate in London, you kind of know that it's not going back. But I don't think the balance is right in some areas. So the point of this debate is to talk about it and to get people's opinions and to kind of share some conclusions. And we've got two guests with us. We've got Nikki Larkin, who runs a very forward-thinking and avant-garde accountancy firm. And so she's broadly speaking in favour of it and quite likes the benefits from it. And then we have Andy Basham, who's a recruiter who is coming from it from as an employee's point of view. So, and Andy's still in favour, but the balance may be a little different to Nikki. So we'll have an interesting debate. So why don't we start off with Nikki and bring Nikki in and see what she's got to say.
Hello, Hi, Nikki.
Good afternoon.
How are you today?
Yeah, I'm really good, thank you.
Good,
okay.
Good.
So we said in the intro, broadly speaking, you're in favour, and it's had a lot of positives for you, hasn't it? So do you just want to give us just a couple of seconds before we bring in Andy, just to kind of give us your take on it, really?
Okay, sure. So there's several things where there are positives. Just to be caveat it, I am mostly in favour of a hybrid situation, but for the work from home part, it's really helped from the parent guilt thing. So for working parents, you always have that problem that when you're at work, you're worried you're not being a good parent. When you're being a parent, you're worried you're not working properly. So by having that work from home, I personally have found I've got a much better perspective of that. I don't have that guilt anymore.
Can you bear with me? Can you just carry on for a second? I've just locked my wife out. This is live TV.
That's exciting, isn't it? Talking about better quality, like I think that's something that a lot of parents feel right now. You know, you always had that aspect of why, you know, I need to be with my business. I need to be at home. Whereas now it's easier to do so, right?
Yes, absolutely. So that's definitely one thing. The second thing, which is really positive from the business perspective, is the efficiencies that you get. So from being able to use the Zoom and Teams model, you know, I'm able to get through so many more meetings. I think my peak has been 12 productive, that was a bit of a crazy day, but 12 productive meetings in a day. Now, when it was back in the real world previously, I think my peak was 5 or 6, and that was a crazy day, but you had so much time traveling between your different meetings. Whereas now I still do have face-to-face meetings, but they're much more select. So therefore, for very specific reasons why you're having it, perhaps it's because you're meeting the person for the first time, or it's a really tricky situation that you're really having to get into detail and you need to see them. And so you pick and choose a bit better. So you have that efficiency. The third thing I would say is it's taking away that presenteeism issue, because being in the office is not necessarily being productive. And you do used to have that thing of like, oh, is it who's going to be promoted? Does that mean I have to be seen to be the first person in and the last person out at time? Whereas now it's not. Because everyone's having to manage you remotely, they're much more au fait with what your real productivity is. What are you actually producing? It's not the hours, it's what do you actually produce. And so therefore from that perspective, it's a much better model from that. But as I said,
you said as well, as a leader, it gives you a chance to work on your business, not just kind of be locked in it. When you're in the office, you're pressing and proximate and the people are there. Can I have a minute, Nikki?
Absolutely. Absolutely. When I'm working, because I have my days in the office and they are maxed out, because I mean all my days are always maxed out, but they're maxed out as being in the business all the time. So, you know, and I end up getting pulled into lots of things where perhaps I shouldn't be pulled in as well, which, you know, again, perhaps I need to improve my management style to make sure that doesn't happen. But by having my mix of working from home, I know that on a Friday, it's a very strategic day. It's a mixture of marketing and strategy plus my NED work. And so that day is, and for me, that fills my love cup. I love doing that kind of stuff. So that sets me up for a really positive weekend.
So you can be better organised, and as a leader, kind of more in control of what goes on. Okay,
Absolutely.
So I think that's a really good summation of to kind of headline level. We are going to debate these in a minute, of course, but I'm going to bring Andy in right about now. And as I do that, as he comes in, if you've got any comments that you'd like to put in about what you see of the benefits of working from home, we'd really like to see those. If you put them in the comments, that'd be great. So let's bring Andy in here. Hi, Andy.
Hi, how you doing?
Yeah, very good. Thank you for coming on the show. Now, you again are broadly in favour of working from home. You haven't got you're not sort of dead against it. But for you, it's more of a balance, isn't it? So what are the things that don't work so well for you as an employee, as it were, working from home or getting that balance right?
Yeah, I think that's the key word, isn't it? It's balance. And I think from what I see and the people that I speak to, it's almost that the balance is so flexible that nobody really knows whether they're coming or going with how they stand or what their actual understanding of the company policy is. So it's almost left to individuals to make their own mind up as to what that means to them.
So you're saying on that, really, as it says there, there seems to be this, well, it's a free-for-all. You can come or stay or do what you like. And what you're saying is probably that's, from an employee's point of view, better to know when you can go in or expected to be in and not.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there was times when, you know, I would head into the office on a particular day and it was fairly empty. And, you know, you'd be thinking to yourself, well, it'd be good actually if there was maybe a structure or an agenda to the day, really. And everybody could get in and you know, it doesn't have to be something, you know, really creative, but it could just be something that would actually get people thinking about, you know, what their current week looks like or how they're approaching certain things.
So you're obviously in a sales role as I am, and I think this energy thing around that kind of job is quite important, isn't it? If you're in a vibrant office with people doing stuff and things are happening and phones are ringing, just increases the energy levels, and I think makes you more productive personally. And if you turn up in an office and there's like only 3 desks occupied, you're not going to get that, are you, at all?
No, exactly. And it goes back to, you know, leaving the employees open to their own choice, which I get in a world where, especially, you know, obviously in recruitment, you know, employers, they want to be able to make their jobs as attractive as possible. So they have to offer what candidates want. And a lot of candidates, they do want that hybrid flexible working. Some will even want 5 days at home per week. And that's fine. But I think there has to be that kind of fine line between, well, each individual role will require a certain different element to being in the office or not. And then, like you said, Mike, in a sales role, if you're trying to get new business or you're trying to create opportunities for yourself, you know, it can be quite a lonely place when you're doing that, you know, remotely. In a sort of an office in your home, really. So I think you need that energy to bounce off your peers to be able to sort of deliver on those objectives you've set yourself.
So I mean, I think the point that you made earlier was quite important. This idea of having a team leader or someone in charge to actually not leave it as a free for all, but rather have it coordinated so that people knew when they were supposed to come in and the reason they were coming in. And knew when they shouldn't be there, and that was fine, and they knew what they're doing. I think so. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So let's just. I'd like to ask a question actually as well, and I'm sure, as I said, if you've got any questions, if you've got any comments, not against working from home, but some of the drawbacks, we'd like to hear those as well. So if you can put those in the comments, Kirsty will come in fairly soon, I would think, with that. One of the things I'd like to talk about, which I think is really important, especially for people at the beginning of their career, is this idea of learning by osmosis. the concept that you learn so much by just being with people who are doing the job that you're aspiring to do. So you hear them on the telephone or you see them in meetings, and you kind of get an idea for what they do, and you can ask questions. Why did you say that, and why did that happen in that way? And of course, certainly last year that all stopped, but now it's very haphazard. And of course, if you rock up into the office and there's no one there, even though you're there, you're not really going to learn very much. So can I bring you on that, Nikki? How do you view that learning by osmosis? How are you getting around that?
Yeah, I mean, that is very important. And so in our hybrid model, we do try and make sure that the trainees have significant amount of time in the office, so they do benefit from that. But obviously, when you're in the full lockdown mode, or if you don't have that option for the hybrid and you're doing the fully work from home, you still can do it. But what you do is you involve your team, your trainees, or whoever else needs to learn into the meeting, so that they can work shadow more, and actually then they do have the opportunity, by being in there and seeing who they're learning from, how they behave in the meeting, and types of questions that they ask, and the analysis that they perform, etc. That it's giving them the opportunity so that there can still be some really positive training situations, but you do have to make sure that you think about it and plan for it.
So it can be learning by osmosis, but whereas before it's sporadic or just haphazard, it just happens because you're there. You really need to plan this in now.
Yeah.
A lot more than you did. Andy, how do you feel about that? Because I mean, you're more experienced. I was going to say you've been around the block a few times, but I'm not sure that's necessarily.
That's a bit harsh.
But you're not at the very beginning of your career, are you? Let's put it that way. No. So you know what you're doing. So, but if you cast your mind back to that stage, you must have learned an awful lot by being with people, I would think.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of emphasis around e-learning these days. Even before the pandemic, I think there was a real increase in that. I've always preferred learning, in a face-to-face sort of structure, in a classroom type, sort of feel. Really, I've always enjoyed that, even when I was at school. That's how I prefer to learn. I've never been the sort of person that can just, learn just in front of a laptop or in a sort of an e-learning type of application. I've never been like that. And I think in a sales role, it is really important to almost soak it all up from people that have been there and done it. And I don't know if enough of that is happening, not just within recruitment, but within, all kinds of organisations.
Well, I would support that. And we'll bring Kirsty in a second. And then I also want to bring in Nikki on this point as well, because this isn't just about sales. It's anything that involves relationship building, because even in accountancy, there's a big push to build relationships with people. It's a really big plank of your business and how you run things. And, sure, you can bring people in on Zoom calls, but that's very scheduled. But often there's been a readjustment as well. People use the telephone a lot more than they used to. So there is that kind of picking up the phone, and you can't bring someone in on a phone call. You can only hear half of it, but you can kind of hear what's going on. And that has all but disappeared, I think, unless it's planned in. So I'll bring Nikki in on that point in a second. But Kirsty, have we got a comment or two coming in?
We have got a couple of comments. So Daryl says he totally agrees with you around our position. And this is the really interesting point that I thought what Daryl put, is that his junior staff are saying that as well. Because I imagine if you are somebody who wants to progress in your career and wants to learn, then I imagine it is quite frustrating to kind of lose out that big training. And so what he's sort of done is they're all in 2 days a week, I think is what I'm reading from that. So they all agree to be in on the same days to deal with that. And it actually brings me to a point that Gavin made here, which is he thinks that the working from home is more about management styles and cultures rather than anything else. And I think that's possibly part of what everybody's saying, is that you need a manager or a management team who are sort of giving more structure to it, I imagine, and sort of taking into account, like Nikki is, we've lost this, but let's bring this in, where you can sit in on Zoom meetings with your camera off and listen to me and things like that. But I don't imagine everybody's doing that. So I think those are some really good points.
I think some potentially some hiring managers, they maybe need to be a bit brave with their handling of it, because I imagine if you're dealing with, a sizable team where there's some really experienced people there, they almost will or can dictate where they want to work from. But if you're trying to grow your culture and grow your team and onboard the juniors, you need to really put your foot down a little bit and say, actually, look, I need you in the office because I need you to help me push through this growth that we're trying to create. And I think there's a certain element of being a bit brave and a bit bold with doing that.
I think that's a really interesting point, actually, because there is this thing, certainly in recruitment, and I'm not sure it's the same in the accountancy field or other people, where if you're trying to get a really good player, they can pretty much have what they want. Just come to us, work from home, 5 days a week if you want. And I think that gets you something, but it loses something as well. And I feel people have to be a little braver with pushing back and saying, well, no, if that's the kind of company you want to work for, it ain't us really, because we're about community and we're about collaboration and we're about sharing. And you ain't going to do that from your back room at home. So I'm sorry, unless you're going to do this, you can't come in. And I know that's a really brave thing, but you're building a team here, not hiring a bunch of individuals. There's a massive difference between those two, I think. Yeah. Nikki, can I just bring you in on the point we made earlier as well about this kind of being the management style and how people really have got to manage it, not necessarily by proximity, which is what you do when you sit with people. That went March the 24th last year, but then they switched over to managing by Zoom, which is just as bad in my opinion. So how do you manage people where they want to work from home, but they still need to learn things? You need to bring people together. How does that all kind of operate for you?
So if you look at global organizations, and I've worked in some really big multinationals, you might be sitting in an office with thousands of people, but what you're working on often might be with people across the world. So what I think is important is to learn from those sorts of management styles I'm used to being in part of a larger team, and often I've never met the people face to face, and that's been, on all my years of working, that's often happened. And it can be done, but it's still down to the quality of the communication. So if you have clear communication, if you have clear objectives, clear culture, what you're all trying to achieve, that can work just as well if you're all spread out across the globe. Equally, it can go just as badly if you're all together in an office, if you're not communicating. So it might make it easier in some ways by being in the same office, and that naturally that communication happens. A lot more ad hoc communication probably happens, but you can still do it. You've just got to be smarter about it.
I think that's a very good point, and I want to ask Andy thinks on this, because essentially, and I know you haven't said this, I'm saying this, not you, Nikki, but I think managers have to up their game a little bit. Whereas you can get by with just going to be in with people, let the whole thing going to happen, really. That's not really what's going to work for here. Your star players will work anyway. They'll be fine. They'll work anywhere and they'll perform and deliver. But it ain't about them, really. It's about the team as a whole, and it's about bringing people forward, bringing them into a culture. And I honestly think that managers need to up their game a little bit. That's not to say that they're bad. It's just that this is the new world and they have to respond to that. Can I ask your opinion of that, Andy?
Yeah, I think I was just thinking as you were talking about how companies can deal with that. And you do see from time to time, in especially the big organisations, a role of chief people officer. Now, I don't know if that's something that would sit with that individual, but at a smaller company, there needs to almost be that sort of responsibility, which can then filter down to each individual hiring manager. Because most managers, they're probably really busy. They're probably, got a sales role in sales or something like that. So they're probably not even really thinking about it. And I think that's where it can maybe improve if it comes down from the top level to almost address some of these issues. Because it comes back to individuals, and each individual has their own different circumstance that they may or may not share.
Yeah, it's about creating something which is bespoke for the people that work for you, which I think it's always been the case. Managers must not look at their team as a team. They're a bunch of individuals, and they must know their strengths and weaknesses and aspirations and threats and fears and all the rest of it. and deal with that. But it's just harder now because you're not with them as much. So I'd like, if anyone's got any comments on this, if anyone does manage people, I'd really like to know what you think about that statement. And if you agree with it, what should managers be doing? What practical things should they be doing right now? Really like to get your input on that, if that's okay. I'd like to come to another point now, really. This whole point of the team. It's been mentioned a few times. And we had a statement, which I've calmed down because Kirsty goes mad. We used to say that the team that drinks together stays together, but apparently you can't say that, can you, Kirsty?
Well, I don't drink a lot. And also, drunk driving, the 90s was a different time, Michael. It's a different time now.
No, I realise that. And we used to sleep over in the office and all sorts. But the point is that it's just the fact that there is this camaraderie bordering on friendship. And in many cases, they become friends, and you stay in touch with people after you no longer work with them. But the idea that it's not just about going for a drink after work. It's not about that. It's about mucking about at work and having a bit of a laugh. And you can do it on social media, you can do it on Zoom, but my goodness, it's so much harder. So can I bring you in on this, Nikki? Well, first of all, do you agree with that? And that would be an interesting opener, I think.
So of that actual statement on the screen, I say there's a lot of issues with that, and it's not necessarily, because that can also create a lot of divides.
Yes, very true.
So for someone who, I did all my training in London, so it was a natural thing to very, very easy to pop out and have a drink afterwards and then hop on a tube or whatever. So that was easy peasy, but it comes with a whole baggage of issues. You've then got to, as an employer, you've got to think, well, are you still responsible for them after if they've gone as a works drink? What if things go wrong? What if somebody's inappropriate? Honestly, it can cause a lot more problems than the positives. So I am all for doing some really good team things together. We got the amount of team lunches we've done, which obviously we haven't been doing recently, but we love our team lunches, and doing other types of events, like we do a intercompany netball tournament that is a real laugh. We do once a year, and things like that.
I've been for that. Yeah, can't be in for that.
There's some really good stuff, but so playing together, yes, but the way they play together, if it's a drinking one, not so good.
That's why we changed the name of it, Nikki, because of that exact reason.
It is, yeah. So you're not necessarily in agreement with the popping over for a quick drink at lunchtime and then not coming back the rest of the afternoon. Probably not.
That's not a good look. No.
This was a different time.
Not that I would ever do that, obviously, ever. In my career, like loads of times. But anyway,
Weekly.
Sales is different, though, isn't it, Andy? I think sales is a bit different too.
Yeah, I do agree with the comment that was on the screen. I do think it's changed a little bit over the years. I mean, I've only been in recruitment 8 years, and even in that period, it has changed a lot. Obviously, being in London might be a bit different still, because it's a much bigger city. So it does depend on where your office is actually located, I think. But I do think that sort of team spirit. If you take it down to the pub or you do some events and things like that, it does certainly.
I think though it's not. I'm just thinking of the Crimson offices when I was there. I mean, it's a big office. You've got a tea room. There's bar football stuff in there and various things. And it's not just about going for drinks after work or organised events.
It's about chatting while you make a cup of tea or something like that.
Yeah. It's something to bump into someone in the tea room and have a little chat, really. And I think that becomes a lot less. It just happens a lot less. And it does affect this cohesive team where you're trying to build a bond between the people who are in the team, which is beyond, look, you've just got to talk to that person because it's your job. It's not about that. You're taking away a good deal of that. And I think Nikki's right. I think you have to be a lot more organised. There has to be a lot more organised stuff, which perhaps isn't as good as the ad hoc stuff in many respects, but it's the best that you can do. And I think it needs to be done, because if you don't have that, you're going to miss out on all of that, really, aren't you?
Yeah, I agree.
I think as well, if you're, especially with junior people, if you've got someone in a tea room or, someone in a breakout room who's sitting next to you eating your lunch, you're more likely to ask that person for help, because whilst there is, as a manager, you are supposed to offer and check in, but there is also an element of being an employee. If you're a Gen Z or a millennial, someone towards the beginning of your career, if you want help, you have to ask for it. And having that, I sat next to them at lunch and I just quickly mentioned it offhandedly and they said, "Oh, I'll just help you with that. Come back to the desk," is a very different thing than pulling up an email and being like, "Will you please help me?" as a
Yeah.
as a more junior person. So there is that element of knowing people in your office well enough to feel safe to ask for help if you're an
Okay,
anxious
now
person like me.
we're coming to the end of the show, and I know Kirsty will do a little wrap up in a second. Two things really. First of all, I'm gonna come to Andy and Nikki in a second, and just for them to give one last piece of advice or a roundup. Look, this is what I think. This is how I think it should be, really, or these are the things that I think people should take into consideration. And for my particular, not roundup, but my take on it is that you have to be a different kind of manager. It ain't about the stars in your business all the time. It's about the people coming through. Their training, their social life in many cases is wrapped around the job. If you're in a little bed sit in Birmingham, then work is a big part of your life. And I think you have to be a lot more coordinated and managed about that. You're creating a team. You're not creating a group of individuals. So I'll come to Andy and Nikki in a second, give you a chance to just think through what you're going to say. Kirsty, would you like to just give us a quick roundup?
Yeah, so I think essentially what we've come to is an agreement that there needs to be a hybrid model. I think working from home has lots of benefits, around your quality of life, especially if you've got a family. It's more efficient, especially if you're higher up in your career, if you're more into it, if you are in a position of strategy or more in control of where the business is going. Working from home gives you space and sort of removal from the everyday. But on the reverse, especially if you're more junior, you miss out on that camaraderie, you miss out on that kind of learning by osmosis. And there is an element of sort of, I don't know who to speak to. So what I think both Andy and Nikki have been saying is there does need to be some structure. There needs to be, okay, you're in the days on these days, or for these meetings you have to be in the office, and a certain amount of, from the manager's perspective, they have to say, we're going to be in the office next week on these 2 days, guys, or something around that. There has to be structure that works for your business, but you cannot just leave it to chance, because it will leave people feeling alienated and perhaps not as efficient as they should be.
Okay, thank you very much for that. If there's any more comments, you can put those in, and Kirsty will bring them up before we finish. Can I come to you, Nikki, for your final statement?
Sure. So I would just say that concur with what Kirsty's saying. It's got to be structured flexibility. If it's not structured, it can just be a disaster. That communication in every way has got to be improved, and everybody can improve on that and find different ways. And it's also making sure that you understand from your employee, from them, what different employees react differently to different types of communication. So make sure that you're adapting your management style for them as well. And key thing as well, and this is whether people are in the office or out of the office, is to know what the warning signs are if there are issues. So understanding somebody's warning sign on one person will look very different to another. We pay attention to the ones that keep moaning and shouting, "Oh, I've got so much work," or whatever else, and you react to that. Sometimes they're not necessarily the ones that are the problem, that have the biggest problems. So you need to actually delve in and understand, communicate, and understand your individuals to know any issues and warning signs, and make it as productive as possible.
I think that's some very good points, particularly the communication ones, which you're right, everyone can improve. And definitely it's the quiet ones that are often in trouble. There's a great film called What Women Want, and there's a person in there that's very quiet and in trouble. And yeah, for sure, that's a really important point. Andy, can I have your closing comments?
Yeah, I mean, both comments there were exactly what I was thinking as well. But what I would add is I think it's important for companies to not rely too heavily on their technology in terms of the Teams calls and the emails and things like that. For a couple of reasons. One, you'll lose that personal touch, not only with your peers, but with your customers. If you become too reliant on technology, you may be missing a trick somewhere along the lines, and before you know it, you've either lost that business or you've lost some employees due to the fact that you've heavily relied on technology. And also goes back to each individual. They've all got different circumstances. Everyone needs something different, in terms of their management style. And I think it's just key to almost understanding your team as best as you can to provide them what they need, really.
Good. Thank you very much. I shall hand back to Kirsty, who's going to close us down, and we'll see you in the next show, I guess. Over to you, Kirsty.
Yes, so thank you very much to everybody who's watched. We have run out of time, so if there are any comments we haven't got through, Mike and I will go through it and reply to them. Next week, it's going to be, I believe, me and Pete for a...
I'm on my hollybobs.
He's living his life large. But we have yet to decide what that's going to be about. That's just, we've been insanely busy, but we will be there, Pete and I, next week. So join us then. And thank you very much to Andy and Nikki. You've been absolutely fantastic. Very insightful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Echo that. Thank you.
We'll see you next week.
Thanks. Bye.